Bonjour mes amis. Je m'appelle Eric MESLIN. I'm delighted to be your moderator for this afternoon's plenary session, Opening Up Science, Opening Up Open Science, Innovations, Ideas, and Possibilities. This particular panel was an idea of our colleagues with ESOF, and I would say a topic that is on all of our minds and gathers all of our attention. The issue is not simply whether. I think we've moved beyond whether to how, in what way, for whom, and hopefully with what kind of innovative ideas can we undertake the large project of making information, knowledge available, useful, and valuable. My job as the moderator is to do three things. First, I would like to introduce all at one time the distinguished members of this panel. I'll ask them to come up to sit in the chairs beside me. Then they will go through some remarks, about 10 or 12 minutes or so. They will go in order. And at the end of that time, we will have the opportunity for some audience questions of the panel. There are 2 microphones set up here in the hall, just on the floor. And as we get close to the end of the panel, you'll have an opportunity to come and ask your question. I would ask with great respect that it be in the form of a question, not in the form of a lecture. Since I hear some laughing a little bit, I think you have all been at meetings where people wish that they were themselves on the panel and use the opportunity for questions to give their speech. I would suggest that it would be just as courteous to ask a very important question, even a hard question, and you will accomplish the same goal. Our goal today is both straightforward and comprehensive. Our goal is to discuss many of the promising ideas for taking open science from an aspirational slogan to an implementable reality. You will hear from 4 different speakers with different background and expertise. Let me briefly introduce the 4 of them, and after I have done so, I would ask them all to take their seat. The first is Yuko Harayama, former executive member of the Council for Science, Technology, and Innovation in the Cabinet Office in Japan. Former Deputy Director of the Directorate for STI at the OECD, co-chair of the Working Group on Open Science under the G7 Science and Technology Ministers Meeting. The second is Kamila MARKRAM. Dr. MARKRAM is a neuroscientist and autism researcher, co-founder and CEO of Frontiers, an open access publisher and social network for academics. I'm especially delighted to add the other sentence from her CV, which reads, "She is on a mission to make research freely available for the benefit of humanity, popularize science, and help create aspirational role models, especially among young scientists." The third speaker is Robert Jan Smits. He is the Open Access Envoy of the European Commission, and prior to this he was, I suspect many of you are already aware, for 8 years the Director General of Science and Innovation at the European Commission, responsible for shaping Europe's research policy and programs, which resulted, amongst others, in Horizon 2020, the $80 billion Euro program, which is known and much beloved by many of us. Our fourth speaker is Koen, who is research professor at the French National Center for Scientific Research, CNRS. After graduate studies in theoretical physics, philosophy, and the history of sciences in Leuven, Utrecht, and Cambridge, he has held various interdisciplinary research positions in Europe and the US, and is currently editor-in-chief of Centaurus, an international journal of the history of science. Briefly about myself, I am the president of the Council of Canadian Academies, an organization in Ottawa that provides evidence-based assessments of some of science and society's most interesting questions. We do that on behalf of the federal government of Canada, other subnational organizations and entities. My training is in philosophy and bioethics, so I think my job is largely to keep the peace, keep this fair, and ensure a just proceeding today. That constitutes my opening remarks. I'd invite our panel members to all come up, and then I will ask Yuko to join me at the stage while I pass over the slide deck to her. Thank you very much. And the first one is there. That will be your first slide.
Thank you, Eric. Many conferences, many meetings, debates on open science. So once more today. But as Eric mentions, our intention is not just propaganda or slogan, but to be more concrete and to take action into the more concrete open science. That's be our challenges. So my hypothesis is that we have to move from slogan, open science, into a new way of doing science. So I will try to convince you in this way. What is open science, fundamentally? We know that science, by definitions, by construction, it is open. You can show from the history of science, and we have historian here. Theoretically, yes, but in fact, it is not so for sure. Take the case of access to knowledge. There are many conditions of use, ownership, cost, and so on. So it is not totally open. And if you look at access to the research data, again, sometimes it is at the discretion of researchers. You can ask, but sometimes they say no. And you may have some unexplored negative data, and it's costly too to maintain data open. And lastly, science is some kind of reserved space for scientists, for professionals. Is it the right way to keep science closed for that? We need to open up. But thanks to the power of internet and the capacity we have to manage data and gathering data, digitization in sums, we are moving into the more 21st century context. And then we are tentatively moving into the direction of what we call open science. How to define it? It's almost impossible to have a common understanding, but just tentatively, we can have some narrow broadening scope. So common understanding will be open in the sense for anyone to access to scientific publication. And also, at the same time, open for anyone to access to and use scientific data. And also, open in the way to produce knowledge. Case of citizen science or network site, we have several sessions on that. And it's ongoing and it's growing. So the idea underlying this three openness is that we are moving into a new science ecosystem. We can paraphrase innovation ecosystem in the way that we do science is changing in any more reserved to professional, and we have a common space to sharing data, and there's many action on the ground. So one example will be from the European Union, Horizon Europe. You will have really big parts of open science. We have Robotium, remote preset. So just bringing all the different components, of related to open science, it is not just a few years ago, quite a long time ago. We started have this kind of open source issues and Creative Commons sharing and putting together and then creating something from these facts of sharing was already in place. And you have Science Commons and so on. So that from open access, now we are moving more and more on open science, much broader sense. What is tricky is not you have at the beginning kind of bottom-up actions. But today you observe more and more policy action promoting open science, not only European Union, in Japan, in different countries. Why? Some reason behind public policy to take account of to promoting open science. Because one part, we have public funded research activities. So by the end, the result should be public goods in some sense. And in other aspect, you can ask yourself, is knowledge divide socially acceptable? If you want to move ahead, it's openness. And also, we can ask ourselves, if the use of scientific data socially optimal, because we are not so many data generated by research activities, not fully explored. And you can combine different resources, and in the way that you may have some new discovery. And you have today power and tools to do that. So kind of place for public action. And what's happened is that not only at the national level, I was personally committed in the parts of promoting global action, and the G8 in UK 2013, it's a really initial kick to have open access and open data discussion at the G8 level, and followed by G7 and the many OECD discussion. We have Global Research Council acting, and co-data and research data, and many fora internationally moving convergence through open science. So from my side, I just bring some concrete action from the Japanese side, because I'm from Japan. I can say two periods, one before 2013 and after 2013. Initial kick was really strongly done by UK. And then we had kind of open access structure before, but it was mainly institutionally repositories. And we had some databases developed in specific research area and share data, but not in all kind of disciplines. So it was discipline-specific actions. And since then, we had set up 5th Science Technology Basic Plan covering 2016 to 2020, and we put at the heart open science as a policy agenda. So it's interaction, international level discussion, and a national one. And we are advocating to have, at the institutional level, data management plan and the data infrastructure and sharing and use of data. It's really promoting from political side. And in 2016, Japan has been hosting G7 Science Academies meeting in Tsukuba. And within this Tsukuba communique, we had really one chapter on open science. And since then, we set up, under the G7 Science Academies meeting, a working group on open science. So we tried to have kind of concrete actions based on this international discussion and national discussion. And what's key is that we have to take action to make reality this open science, to have really infrastructure for data, but also at the same time, researchers really putting into practice this open science should be rewarded, having some incentive. And all the research career should be based on this open science attitude. So that's lead to a really completely new framework, what I called at the beginning, science ecosystem. It's not only just having a project of open science, but we have to review, and we are underway, kind of transition phase today, and how to facilitate smoothly this transition will be the question raised to policymakers. And also, sometimes you have good intentions, but sometimes when you take action, you may have some non-intentional consequences, and you have to take care of these non-intentional consequences. For example, take the case of open access. You have open access journals, and it's become a new opportunity for new businesses. And sometimes for researchers, it's maybe most costly and less quality ensured way to publish. So we have to take care of all these complementary structures, and that's the way that we have to take action all together globally, not only at the national level. So I'm really completely supporting the idea launched by OECD 2015, making open science a reality. That means today, what I'm advocating today is making open science as a practice. And we need to explore together a new way of doing science. Trial, error, but improving every day and all together is key. Thank you so much for your invitation.
So I think my presentation is coming up. Thank you, Yuko, for this great insight into Japan's initiatives. And let's see, is mine coming up? No, because they need to switch. This happens to me always at all meetings. I have to entertain the crowd, and I still have not the right jokes for this situation. But I think they're going to put it up soon. Perfect. So thank you, first of all, to have me here in this amazing crowd. I'm going to check now whether it's running. Yeah, almost. This is so bad. It's completely messed up. I see slides that shouldn't be inside there. So it's going to be an interesting presentation. I have no clue what's going to come up. There are some slides that are not supposed to be in there. Anyways. Okay, thank you very much. I think everybody here in this room agrees that making our research results openly available is so much better than locking them away. But there's still a lot of confusion around open access, and one is actually around quality. And people say, can open access journals really deliver the same type of quality as our subscription journals? Well, I'm going to try to show you, based on data from SCImago, the latest data, which is based on the Scopus database from Elsevier, that open access is not only able to deliver great quality, but in many cases it outperforms subscription journals. So what we've done here is we've taken the largest publishers, 20 largest publishers in 2017, and overall they published more than 4 million articles in the last 3 years behind subscription paywalls. Around 600,000 articles, as you can see here. Oops, no, this way. Doesn't go back. Perfect. 600,000 articles were published in open access journals. And then we looked at the average citations of these articles. Citations basically tell you how much science has been built on top of an article or a journal and are a solid indicator of quality. And what we see that in yellow, the average citation count in the last 3 years for open access journals is higher than for subscription journals. Now let's expand this last graph and let's look again at the 20 largest publishers, and in gray you see their subscription journals, in yellow you see their open access journals. In the American Physical Society, their open access journals are generating, on average, more citations than their subscription journals. The same is the case in the Oxford University Press. Open access journals are generating more cites than subscription journals. In Springer Nature, their open access journals are generating twice as many citations as their subscription journals on average, which is comparable to Frontiers, a pure gold open access publisher just here. Over here you see Elsevier, and yes, indeed, their subscription journals are still generating more cites than their open access journals, but that rate is comparable to the open access journals of the Public Library of Science Plus, and it's less citations than the open access journals of Springer Nature or Frontiers. So already today, what we see from this graph, in the last 3 years, on average, open access journals are generating more citations. Now let's collapse this graph again. Here we're looking again at the 20 largest publishers in the world as of today, and what you can see in this graph is that Frontiers, a pure gold open access publisher, is within this group the 4th most cited publisher in the world. Above Frontiers, you see highly specialized society publishers in the realms of chemistry and physics, but amongst the multidisciplinary publishers, Frontiers is actually already the most cited. We're not up alone there. There's other pure open access publishers. If you look, for example, at PLOS, they're today the 6th most cited publisher in the world as well, ahead of Elsevier and Springer Nature. And if you look at the subject-specific categories and look now not at average citations but at total cites, then you'll find again in the latest journal citation reports that Frontiers journals are the most cited journals in the world in neuroscience, in microbiology, in plant science, and in psychology, and amongst the citation leaders in many other fields as well. Here is the multidisciplinary category in the journal citation reports. This is where you find your very famous journals, your Nature, your Science. But you'll probably be surprised to find that in the last year, the three most cited journals in the world were open access journals. And together, they generated twice as many citations as Nature, Science, and PNAS combined. The reality is that today, more science is already being built on open access journals than on your most famous subscription journals combined. That's the data. Again, if you look at average citations as computed by the latest impact factors, Frontiers journals are listed in over 20 categories and are again in the top quartiles on impact factor. The same is the case if you look at the CITE score, which takes now 3 years into account. You'll find that Frontiers journals are listed in more than 55 categories and are amongst the most impactful journals in the world on CITE score. So I think from this data you can see that open access journals are already generating scientific excellence at scale, and in many cases even better than the subscription journals. Now, how is this done? How can you do that? Well, I can't talk really about the other publishers, but I can show you how we do it at Frontiers. So we actually take our inspiration from the aviation industry. There you as well flying more and more planes up in the air. But at the same time, flying is becoming safer and safer. So how is this done? How do you fly safely? Well, the first thing that you need is the very best pilots. So we take great care to recruit only the best researchers to our editorial boards, currently around 80,000 from all the top universities, Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Max Planck, you name them. And they edit and they peer review the articles, but they also set the example for publication. So out of the 90,000 articles that we've published so far, around 64% of the authors come from one of the world's top 300 institutions. But the best pilots are not enough to fly safely. You also need a great plane. You need the best technology. And this is what sets Frontiers really apart, is we are building in-house great technology to support and enable the people. So what we do is we operate on standard operating procedures and in checklists that get translated into code and into software, eventually into our website. And here, for example, you can see our online collaborative review forum, which is entirely online. It operates on hundreds of workflows, and it has automated all mundane tasks so that humans, scientists, can actually focus on what matters most, and that is to perform a rigorous, high-quality peer review. And now we've also started to using artificial intelligence to help us safeguard and continuously improve quality. AI is transforming the world, and we believe it can as well help us to publish better science. Our peer reviews team now already does more than 40 different quality checks, many of them already aided by technologies such as language quality, plagiarism, conflicts of interests, and now artificial intelligence helps us to do more and better of those. For example, we can now detect faces and figures that can alert our research integrity team to check whether subject consent forms have been submitted. All of this delivers impact, and impact is measurable, not just with amazing citation metrics for journals, as I've shown before, but as well on the article level with views, downloads, and citations for the articles. And here you can see just how impactful open science is, what a great impact open science has already on the world. Of the 90,000 articles that Frontiers has published, they had more than 420 million views and downloads from all over the world, massively, Europe, US, but as well India, Latin America, and most strikingly, from economic hubs. Some of the most downloads come from the Silicon Valley and from Shenzhen in China. Because most companies today depend on the latest science to survive and thrive. Today's economy is a knowledge economy. And in this context, it's incredibly important to have rapid and open access to the latest scientific results. That's why we need open science now, and Europe today is leading the way. By 2020, all EU-funded research needs to be publicly available, and we have the visionaries behind this. We had them at this conference, from Carlos Moedas and his team to today Robert-Jan Smits, who's going to enforce the deadline of 2020. And open science has already been strongly embraced by the European academic community, as evidenced as well in our data set. More than 40% of the 300,000 authors and the 80,000 editors in Frontiers already come from Europe. And European research has great and high impact. Out of the 10 most viewed, most downloaded, and most cited countries, 6 are actually European, including Switzerland, Netherlands, France, Spain, Germany, UK, and Italy. And as a just nice cherry on the top, within our sample, the EU-funded research, so ERC, FP7, and so forth, has actually the highest citation counts, citation rates. So well done, Europe. But European universities are as well leading the way in making the financial infrastructure for open access possible by signing these open access agreements with open access publishers. And we, in fact, have signed just this year at Frontiers 2 of the first landmark national open access agreements with Sweden and with Austria that facilitate the payments for all our authors within the country. I believe the tide is changing. In the past, and still today, access to our science was very restricted. But in the future, hopefully by 2020, thanks to the leadership of Europe, all science will be open. It will also be machine readable, and it will be AI ready. That's as well a mission that we pursue at Frontiers. And that is really when we're going to start seeing innovation at a pace that is even more accelerated. It will continue to drive our economies even more. And it will give us all these solutions that we so desperately need for a sustainable future. And I think that this future is bright. We just got to be relentless right now and drive this transition to open science. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Yuko and Kamila, for a great presentation. As you all know, the European Commission is one of the champions of open access and open science. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, we launched a consultation amongst the science community with the question, do you think that the way you're doing science, the way you're doing research has changed and is being changed? And the overwhelming majority of the people who responded to our survey said, yes, absolutely. And then we asked, why do you notice changes in the way you're doing science? And they say, well, of course, there is the big data which are available. There are the digital technologies which allow us to mine the data. There is, of course, the globalization of the science community, so with enormous possibilities for international cooperation. There is increasing demands from society for quick solutions, and citizens want to be part of society and of science. So there were a number of reasons mentioned, drivers for open science. And then we identified, together with the stakeholders, with the science community, what is it then, what is necessary to make open science a reality and to really exploit all these opportunities to the full extent. And of course, the list was a long list, and amongst them is, of course, a safe haven for putting data, and that brings us to European Open Science Cloud. There was indeed the request to have the citizen more involved in agenda setting, citizen science. There was very clearly a request to do more at international level, more global partnerships. There was indeed a request very clearly for text and data mining, TDM, which is a big issue at the moment, political level discussion that allow European scientists to text and data mine. So we have established a long list, and amongst that list was, of course, open access to scientific publications. And that brings me to my task and to my talk, because I was appointed, as you may know, to the assignment of open access envoy at the European Commission, with a very simple task is to see where do we stand in Europe with regard to full and immediate open access. And by the way, I should mention that when we talk about all the work the European Commission is doing in the field of open science and open access, there's one person, I don't know if he's present in this room, who really has been the champion, and that's Jean-Claude Burgerman, which I think we do not always recognize, but he is the man who put this on the agenda. So Jean-Claude, a great job done. And if you're here, you know, you should get a big hand for that. Open access scientific publications, that's indeed my assignment. Why did I get the assignment? From President Juncker, so a clear assignment from the top in the European Commission. Well, very clearly, because in 2016, during the Dutch presidency, the 28 ministers, science ministers of the European Union, they unanimously agreed that there should be full and immediate open access to scientific publications in 2020. But the pace is slow, and the transition is extremely slow. If you look at where we stand today, and that's the first thing I did in my new assignment, to see is it indeed slow, the transition? Are we going to get there in 2020 or not? So the first thing I did is to look at where do we stand today. And I noticed very, very quickly that indeed the pace is much too slow with regards to full and immediate open access. Perhaps just for the ones who are not familiar perhaps with the term open access, I put a definition on here. Open access for us in our definition is when scientific publications that are the result of publicly funded research are fully and immediately available and without restrictions on renews. And again, not only the minister said we want to have full and immediate open access, all people in the science community said it as well. We have thousands of declarations and statements about we need to have full and immediate open access as soon as possible. We have that from LERU, from the European Universities Association, for all kinds of networks, EARTO, the guilds, Euriform, CERN, the European Academies. Everyone says we want full and immediate open access. And the reasons why we want to have that, I think, are extremely clear as well. First of all, it's a matter of principle. If we put billions of euros into research from the public purse, it's only fair that the citizen in Europe has rapid and immediate access to that knowledge. And of course, for a reasonable price. And I mentioned reasonable price. But also, if you look at the current system, which is mainly subscription-based, if you see what it costs us, it's a fortune. At global level, we are paying per year around 8 billion euro in subscriptions fees. 8 billion euro to be allowed to read what we have been paying with the public purse in the field of science. A bizarre situation. And then there's another element, which is of course access to this know-how. If there is so much knowledge behind paywalls, and only way to get access to that knowledge is by subscribing to very expensive journals, you can already figure out what is happening. Only the happy few who can afford paying the subscription fees have access to that know-how. And the rest, if they are lucky, there will be after embargo period some kind of an access, but many won't have access at all. They won't have access to the public money we put into science. And that's of course a very bizarre and unacceptable situation. There's also another reason, I think Kamila mentioned that, why we need to move rapidly forward with full and immediate open access, is that the pace of innovation is accelerating. We can't afford having embargo periods of 6 or 12 months before we are allowed to read an article. This should go much quicker. And that was the reason why indeed I was given this assignment, is to look into where do we stand, and the findings for me were very clear. This transition is far too slow. And as a matter of fact, and that's quite interesting, we are today at 20% full open access. 15 years ago, we were at 15% full and immediate open access. So in 15 years, we went from 15% to 20%. Now, we still have 80% to go. And do you really think by 2020 we're going to get there? Impossible. Impossible unless we are taking radical and robust measures. And that is something on which I'm working at the moment. I've called it Plan S, speed, solution, science, so that we can quickly move forward in this important area of open access to scientific publications. But I discovered also, when I went around and not only looked into, is the pace too slow? Is the transition too slow? The answer is yes. Why is it so slow? And I discovered quite quickly that there are an enormous amount of vested interests, hypocrisy into the system, traditional working methods which prevent us to accelerate the pace. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you are the boss of an academic library and you get each year a lot of money to pay for subscriptions, well, then you are an important person. If you don't have that money anymore, your status may go down the drain. And if you are a university and you have so much work to do, no time to really spend a lot of time in recruiting new staff, so you base yourself on the journal impact factor, that is the way you use to quickly recruit top talents, and no time to look anymore into the publications of the person, or the person has been doing in the field of citizen science or sharing data or working for the local economy. If you are the publishers, the traditional publishers, I'm not talking about the open access publishers, but the more traditional ones, the global market for scholarly publications is around 10 billion euro per year. Some of these traditional publishers make profits of around 40% on their journals. I mean, if you are in that business, of course, as long as people can publish in subscription journals, you will provide that service because you know you make a hell of a lot of money. So I come quickly to the conclusion that the pace of the transition is too slow. There are numerous reasons why we are not having a transition in a speedy way. And I've also come very clearly to the conclusion that unless we take radical measures, we are not going to have full and immediate open access before the end of the, say, 2030s. Now, I also discovered who holds the key to the solution in their hands. And this key is in the hands of the funders. Because the funding bodies, whether these are the National Research Councils, such as the DFK in Germany, or the ANR, the research councils in the UK, or the European Commission with Horizon Europe, or the charities, look at the Wellcome Trusts, the Volkswagen Stiftung, they hold the key in their hands. And if they agree all together on a new set of rules, we can flip the system quite easily. And that is the Plan S, which you may have heard of, on which I'm working. And that is a plan which I had hoped to announce today with all its 7 components. It's a simple and straightforward plan, but it's a quite robust plan. But unfortunately, I'm not yet in a position to do so because we still have negotiations with a number of research bodies because I want to build a very strong coalition of a large number of European funding organizations to join in Plan S and to make sure that we are taking robust measures to flip the system for once and for all. And as a matter of fact, it's not that difficult what needs to happen. And therefore I can reveal already the main components of Plan S. And that's something very much based on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If you got a grant, if you'll get a grant in future from any of the funding agencies in Europe, including from the European Commission, you can only fund in open access journals, in high quality open access journals. And we together, as funders, will decide what are the qualifications which a high quality open access journal or platform will meet. So actually, the measures which we are thinking about, the Plan S, are not rocket science, they're relatively straightforward. Because, and that's something which I also learned in the business in which I was for many years, DG Research Innovation, the power is with the ones who hold the purse and the money. They can change the system. And again, this requires really courage from the different funding agencies in Europe. This requires courage from the European Commission and the European Commissioner. And you heard Commissioner Moedas already in his opening statement saying that he's quite committed to really address the issue of open access to scientific publications. And my job is now to align these different funding agencies, to align the European Commission, and to very soon announce this Plan S, which then hopefully will accelerate rapidly the transition to full and immediate open access. Because once again, it should be not difficult for European citizens to access the results of publicly funded research. That's a public good, and we should be entitled to have that as quick as possible. So the days of the high and expensive paywalls are over. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I would like to start by thanking Anne Cambon-Thompson for inviting me here. And I would like to thank Eric for organizing, that means putting into order our session. And I very much liked his title, Opening Up Open Science, which I take to mean opening up the black box of open science. Because open science has indeed become a slogan. It has many different meanings, as Yuko already talked about. It can range from open notebook science, which means everything that an experimentator is doing comes online freely to see for everyone, to a hybrid gold open access journal. I very much like Peter Murray Rust's characterization of open science. For him, open science really comes from the heart. It is something scientists do to share their material with other scientists, but also to improve society. But on the other hand, open science is also a marketing strategy. So I think we need to open up this black box to get clarity about what we really want with open science. But I think the real danger is not really the vagueness or the confusion of the concept of open science. The problem is that it sounds so good. Who can be against open science? But that's exactly the danger, because it allows what's being called open washing, which is people like stakeholders pretending to do open science, but in fact not really being open science, or doing some kind of openness, but which not really benefits research or society. So I think this means there are different kinds of open science. There are bad open science, there are different shades of gray of open science. And I think this means that it becomes urgent and necessary to talk about good open science. And I'm speaking from the perspective of a historian and philosopher of science, as Eric already mentioned, but even more so as a member of the Global Young Academy. I have led the Open Science Working Group. I'm now a member of the Executive Committee of the GYA. And this is an academy of young scholars that has a global reach, and one of its main visions is to give young researchers a voice, which includes a voice in the debate of open science. And if you don't know the GYA, I recommend you to look it up online. And so that's what I'm going to do from that perspective, to talk about what good open science means. And I formulated 5 principles, which I think are important. The first one is good open science is a means. It is not an end in itself. And that's not something I invented. You can find that in the OECD report on open science from 2015. It means that open science should not become just an ideology in itself. And open science should be understood as part of a broader interaction between science and society. I think this is a great first principle because there's already so much embedded in that. And at least it makes us think again, like, to what exactly is open science, the means. The second principle is that good open science supports good research and innovation. And you're not supposed to read the whole slide here because there's far too much on it. But I want you to focus on the last point just as an example. Good open science uses the full potential of new technologies and does not create new artificial barriers. So if we want good open science, it means that today when computers can read scientific papers, they are allowed to do so. Although some publishers would argue that the right to read only holds for human people actually reading a paper, it is important to be able to use the full technological potential and especially not to create these artificial barriers to close off science again in other ways. The third principle that Robert Jan also mentioned, open science is a public good. And this seems, like many of these principles, seem simple and evident. But that's really not the case, because almost each of them is being challenged in different ways. Take, for instance, the first one here. Good open science is freely and universally accessible. I mean, some publishers have argued that open access should be open only to certain countries and not to others. So actually, they're closing off again, even under the name of open science. Another issue which shows that open science is part of a broader problem of the relationship between public good and private interests, and how we can actually create a good interaction between both. And we can go into more detail in discussion if you want to. But I think that also points to what I think is an ideal of good open science that would privilege a service model of scientific publishing in which the scientist and the scientific community keeps control of the content, but also the rights of processing this content, like in the metadata, machine reading, indexes, and metrics based on all this material. A fourth principle is that with good open science, you don't disempower the scientists. And I think this is especially important from my perspective as a GYA member speaking for young scientists and also for like the global perspective on open science. The first one is that in implementing open science, the burden shouldn't be on the researchers. The researchers are already overstretched with administration, teaching, grant applications, all these things. So if there is new implementations, these should be simple, but there should also be help, and so therefore funding to implement this and to help researchers to achieve open science. Open science has different faces. One of our members talked to me about not being able to go to conferences, the key conferences in her field, because she didn't have the funding. She came from the Global South, which means access, open access, is more than just reading papers. It's also participating and going to the places where science really happens. This means, again, empowering those who are disempowered in the system. I think this is very important for good open science. And continuing on that, I think open science policy should not disempower even more those who are already disempowered in the system, and notably young scholars, scholars from low and middle income countries, and the soft disciplines. And this is something that is maybe a little bit surprising, But many people in the global south, researchers, actually are a bit suspicious about open science and open data because they feel this is another way to extract data from them without getting anything in return. So they see this as a kind of neo-colonial science and a way of extractive science. And so this is something to be taken into account. And the fifth principle is good open science needs a supportive research culture. It actually needs a new culture of collaboration, it needs a new culture of evaluation, and also a new kind of trust within science. Because science can be messy, and science can fail. Science fails most of the time. So we need a space in which we are allowed to fail and where we can put that into the open. And I think these changes need to happen before we get really behavioral change, before scientists will be willing to actually bring all their material and all their actions into the open. Now you may think this is idealistic nonsense, but that misses the point, because I think, well, this is actually meant as a practical and pragmatic proposal. Of course, this is not something to be reached immediately, but these are guidelines when we make practical and pragmatic decisions on open science. This is something to keep in mind. This is something to strive for. That's the direction we want to go. It's also a way to evaluate new policy proposals or proposals from stakeholders. Our actions should be pragmatic, but they should also be principles-based. And that's necessary because open science can go wrong in so many ways. If history teaches us something about open science, it's actually not that science has always been open. In fact, it's almost the contrary. Open science is fragile. History shows that there have been pockets of open science and open applied science and open technology in different contexts with different structures and characteristics, but most of them did not survive. So we're actually very lucky we have something like open science, and it needs to be protected and nurtured. And especially because soon we will face new challenges and new technological disruptions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists. As I had said at the outset, there are two microphones, one to my right and left. I would invite you to make your way to the microphone. It would also be useful if you could say your name and an affiliation. It could be your country, it could be your institution, whichever you prefer. And I'll just probably be quite fair and go back and forth. So if there's a question on this microphone, please go ahead. And if you want to direct it generally or to a person, by all means, do so.
Okay. My name's Emma Pusey. I'm from the journal eLife. And my question is a general question. There are lots of initiatives to make science and data more available, but it still requires a high technical knowledge to actually be able to use it. So I was wondering, are there any policies in place to try and make it more understandable and easier to use?
Well, maybe, you know, like I could refer then to Jean-Claude Bürgelmann's Open Science Cloud now, which is going to think about providing that type of infrastructure for collective, well, for data collection across many different universities in Europe. And of course, it takes annotation of that data, and the experts come together and give that type of expertise of how to do that. But first of all, you need to build a platform, and that is what Europe, with the Open Science Cloud, is doing.
So I'm not sure if this is really answering your question, but there are many different local initiatives to support open science. And you see also that like universities like Oxford have offices and support to actually help people to become open, but others don't. And I think there is a great disparity there.
There are many initiatives at the local, national, European level, but from the beginning, we start to have some global common understanding, that to have some kind of standard, if you want, to make sure that it's not isolated for some parts in the world. but working in the hand in hand, the same direction. It will take time, but you need to have pressure from politicians to go ahead quickly and as soon as possible, as pragmatic as possible, as simple as possible.
I will only add, I think your question is doubly important if the point of Robert Jan's argument, which I thought was so compelling and almost so obviously compelling, which is why it's so good, a kind of reciprocity, the golden rule, if you have the gold, you get to make the rules, and that is placed on the shoulders of funders. But there are those who would be beneficiaries of open science who are not themselves researchers, who are not themselves individuals working in an environment with even access to the World Wide Web and the like. And I think your question speaks to not simply the technical manipulation of a platform, but the very technology that's supposed to enable might itself be a potential barrier. And I know that's an issue well aware of those by those on the panel. So thank you very much. Let's go to the next microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. Mattias Björnmalm, Imperial College London. I just wanted to ask if the Commission and the panel think that hybrid journals has a part of the open science future, or is it a thing of the past?
Who wants that? They're going to point to each other.
I will react to it.
There you go.
I wait with my view and let the others say first.
Well, to be brief, I think it's for the past.
I think in the new Europe Horizon program, it's a thing of the past.
It's a question of transition management, because we have to have some programmatic approaches in the way that hybrid will be some potential, but in a longer term, we may have some more ambitious goal. So we don't know how long it will take, the transition, but intention is as quick as possible. So still, we have to be not eliminating from the beginning, but taking advantage of exploring all the potential and say what should be the end.
Now I will say what I think of it. I think, Yuko, you made a good statement. I mean, the hybrid journals, if they are part of a transition, a quick transition, as is being negotiated at the moment, for instance, with Max Planck and some of the publishers, that is acceptable. But I have the feeling that they have been introduced to again continue with the current system, which is a subscription-based model. So in other words, it's a clever way of just continuing with the status quo. And that is something where I'm extremely suspicious with regard to the role of hybrid journals, because I see that they are not necessarily helping us to get to this full and immediate open access which we want. And therefore, as Yuko said, if they're part of a transition period and part of negotiations like Max Planck is having them, there's no problem for 1 or 2 years. But you know, we can't have these for a period up to 10 or 15 years, because then again, there will not be the full and immediate open access we've been waiting for. The Berlin Declaration on open access was in 2003, 15 years ago. And as I mentioned, for 15 years, we went from 15% full immediate open access to 20%. And I don't want these hybrid journals to be another, say, blockage to accelerate the system. So for that reason, I have mixed feelings with regards to hybrid journals. And like Koen and Kamila said, this is a system, they are part of the old system and not of the modern way we would like to go to. So as part of a transition period, I can live with it, but it has to be a damn short transition period.
Thank you. Let's go over here.
Holly Els, I'm a reporter at Nature. My question is for Robert Jan Smit. I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about Plan S, and secondly, are the publishers aware or involved at all?
As a matter of fact, the first, say, stakeholders I talked to when I got this assignment were the publishers. So I've met with the Federation of European Publishers, I met with the CEOs of the big publishing companies, because they are very impressive companies with a long tradition, and I also want to hear from them how they saw the transition to full immediate open access. And as a matter of fact, many of the ideas of Plan S comes from them. Because what I always did when I met with them, but also with open access journals, I met with Kamila, I met with the Young Academy. I mean, when I meet with people, I always ask a very simple question. If you would be in my position and you have to give President Juncker recommendations to speed up the process to full immediate open access, what would you do? Well, and the funders, the publishers, the traditional publishers, they more or less gave, the answer, which is this Plan S. Well, they say as long as there is demand for subscription journals, as long as scientists want to publish there and have the possibility to publish there, then of course we will serve that market. But for the moment that the things dry up, because the funder does not allow it anymore, well, then we have to flip the journals to open access. Well, it's a very simple solution which the publishers themselves brought to my attention.
Can you give us any more details about the plan?
Well, as I said, I mean, we are at the moment working with the funders, and I want to have a critical mass of funders behind Plan S before I will announce it. We have a great cooperation with Science Europe, which is the network, the European Association of National Research Councils. And Mark Shields, who's the president, is really a strong and keen supporter of Plan S. But I need a bit more time. I had hoped that I could do it here. I need to get a bit more time to get a critical mass of funding agencies on board. I'm not there yet. I had hoped that this would be the event where I could announce it, but I need a bit more time, which is also understandable because it is quite a revolution what we are proposing, and it will really be a break with the past, and it will have consequences for the system. And that's why I also understand why certain funders in certain countries say we need a bit more time to reflect over it, but I really want this to be announced before the summer break starts. And now you're going to ask me when the summer break starts, of course.
Good reporting. Thank you very much. Let's go to this microphone here.
Congratulations everyone for such an inspiring panel. My name is Eva Mendez. I'm a Jerun representative in the Open Science Policy Platform. By the way, Jerun is one of the biggest supporters of the open science policy. And I think it's very valuable, the universities that we are born with the web, that we have to move the world to help open science happen. I have a comment and a question. Thank you, Kamila, because you were very interested in a speech in the way that I have to convince my president to move to open access. But it's the traditional landscape for research. I would like to know what do you think that is going to be the disruptive way to make open science happen? And I have to disagree with you when you said that the citation, it is an indicator of quality. I disagree completely. Citation is an indicator of popularity. And my question is for all of you. We have been 15 years, like Robert Jan said, 15 years from Berlin Declaration. What we have done wrongly? And what is your definition for the whole panel about excellence in science, and how can open science help excellence? Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think I actually agree with Robert Jan. I think the signal comes really, what have we done wrongly or what have we not done enough? The signal needs to come very, very strongly from the funders, because researchers do quite a lot to get a grant. And if the funders say it needs to be in open access, they will do as the funders say. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has shown that it is possible. Others are implementing it. Let's do it at a large scale. That means to mandate, please publish your research if you want to have money from us in an open access journal. I think if that is implemented, it will go much, much faster. The other thing, that I believe has not been done, and that every university administrator, every funder can implement as well, is about the evaluation process. Because indeed, today people look, and it's very compelling, where have people published and what kind of journals have they published in order to evaluate whether they should get a grant, whether they should get the tenure. I do believe we need to move to article level and author level metrics The technology is there. We, for example, have pioneered much of this technology already 10 years ago, but you can also get it from Web of Science or Scopus or wherever to really find out how many views, downloads, citations, whatever it is that you want. I'll follow your guidance. If you tell me which metrics to use, I'll implement them. But at the article level, how much impact did this article have? You can translate that into author metrics, you can translate it into university metrics or whatever, and start using that as one of the main indicators. Of course, you need to read the papers, you need to be qualitative as well. Nobody says that you shouldn't be doing, but if you have to do quick decisions and allow numbers to help you, it probably should not be the journal impact factor, which is a great way how to evaluate and rank journals, but not people. That should be done on author level metrics.
You asked a good question, as I try to also address in my presentation. What went wrong? Why did we go in those 15 years since the Berlin Declaration from 15% for local access to 20? Why is it so slow? And as Kamila also said, and I tried to say that in my presentation, when the ministers, the politicians said, we want to have by 2020 full immediate open access, they left the room and then they said to the universities, you sort it out. And then these universities had to negotiate with these big publishers. And this was, of course, you know, very often I say David against Goliath, and the only time that David has won was in the Bible, and all the other times Goliath won. These publishers are, of course, extremely strong organizations, and they know exactly what they paid and what they offered as conditions to the different countries, and there were confidentiality agreements, so the German university did not know what the French were paying. So, I mean, it was, of course, extremely stupid of the politicians to say, listen, we have a target and now we leave it to the university to try to sort it out. That was the big mistake. And the ones who did not take the responsibility were the funders. And they have the key to the solution. They set the rules of the game. The funder decides. Now, interestingly enough, and that's nice about my new job, I can read a lot and I can talk a lot. And one of the strongest inhibitors to accelerating the phase 2 full immediate and open access is the science community itself. The science community itself, which is extremely, how should I say, hypocritical, may I use it? If I ask a scientist, do you want to have access immediately to the data of your colleague and to his publications? Yes, immediately, open access. And what do you want to publish yourself? Well, I prefer a subscription journal, even if there's an embargo. So there's hypocrisy in the system. And we should also get rid of this obsession with the high impact journal. And there's only one metrics on which we are basing at the moment reward systems in universities, you know, that people get a reward, you make a career because if you publish in a high impact journal. We don't give rewards for people who do citizen science, who share data, who work for the local economy, who transfer knowledge to the industry. I mean, that's not happening at all. So we should really get rid of this obsession with one metrics and develop new metrics. So there needs to be also cultural change in our universities, in our science community, and I discovered that there's a lot of hypocrisy. And the same when I met with some presidents of the top European universities, they all said, yes, open science and open access, we need open access immediately. And then I asked them, who amongst you are still working on the editorial board of a subscription journal? And then, you know, half raised their hand. I mean, come on, get real. Either you're full and immediate open access, or you want to keep the traditional system in place, subscription-based model. But there's nothing against that, but let's be clear then about it and stop the hypocrisy which is at the moment so present in the system. Just one thing with regard to the traditional journals, and I mentioned that I met the traditional publishers at several occasions. I want them to be part of the change. I want them to go into open access journals, and many of them are already doing it for a simple reason that they have a fantastic peer review system. They have amazing journals, so I want them to flip. That is my only objective, which when I meet with them, I said, you know, don't try to stick to old-fashioned business models. The film industry did not succeed and the music industry does not succeed. And you also will not succeed as publishers. Join the change, join the open access movement and become champions of the change.
Thank you very much. I fully agree with
You have a couple more comments from your large question. We'll make them brief. Koen?
I think it's a brilliant question, and I think open science and evaluation are so intertwined, it's sometimes hard to take them apart. And it's more than open access, even if that contributes to scientific excellence, I'm sure. Open data, replicability, there's so many examples. Open peer review, we haven't talked about that, and how that can play a role in evaluation. And I think, I mean, I'm very skeptical about the metrics, and I think we really need to find new ways of qualitative evaluation, which may include open peer review and having like peer review other roles in the system being picked up, because everything is already evaluated in many ways, right? But it's not being taken into account in the system later on. But I just have to disagree on one point with Robert-Jan, which is the hypocrisy of the researchers. I trust the scientists. It's maybe in my genes, I don't know. And I think like 95% of them would like to change, would go open access, would go open science, but they need support and they need systems and roadmaps. And it's also not their job. Their job is to do the science, and they like try to find the most easy way to get their thing published, and they want to continue in the lab. So we need really well thought through support systems to make this happen.
Just a few words about excellence. Excellence is not a definite concept, evolving concept. And today, any more evaluating, assessing research activity with a monolithic thinking. So we have a way now to have multiple ways to measure, assess, including metrics we have. But the danger to stick to the metrics only is that you are modifying the reality. So we need to have complementary approaches to show that what is excellence. And you have to have a discussion within your community, across community, to define what's the goal as excellence is. It's evolving, so it's up to us to take advantage of existing tools, data, and the papers in a way to really move ahead with science.
Thank you.
Can I say something? And I
In
will
4
sit down
seconds.
and close my mouth. I will just finish your intervention on this topic with the sentence that I said in the call for action in Amsterdam. We all agree that we need to change the way we measure science. Well, we don't do it. Thank you.
We'll come over here. Thank you for waiting.
Hi, Beth Baker, PLOS. We've spoken quite a lot about open access. I'd like to hear your thoughts about going beyond that to what Yuko called open knowledge production, including open peer review and so on. Thanks.
Anyone want to jump in? Yeah, you had mentioned. You're on the, there's the mic.
Well, I guess in a way my whole presentation was on open science more generally than open access. And I really think we need to think more broadly about open science. I mean, people were mentioning open peer review. I think it's a very interesting model. At the same time, people are often afraid of open peer review. So this is also a debate the scientific community still needs to have. And so I had on the slide at some point the need for safe spaces to some extent, like where researchers can do their things without being shut down immediately. And so I understand sometimes it is, it's not comfortable that every comment on your work may be out there in the open. At the same time, I think it's useful, and I think the culture needs to change, that becomes acceptable, and like, well, good negative comments are actually a very good thing. But that demands a change in culture, I think, that's needed.
I disagree a little bit, but I think you just have to do it, you know? When we started Frontiers, about 10 years ago, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary now, we said on every article that is peer-reviewed, the names of the peer reviewers and the editor needs to be just put there. And you know, like everybody said, oh no, I don't want to put my name there. We don't want this, it's not nice, it's gonna, you know, like corrupt the peer review, I can't say what I want, da da da. We said, well, you know, like that's the that's the rules. That's how it's going to work here. If you want to be part of it, you got to put your name on the paper. And then everybody did it. We published 90,000 papers with everybody's name on it. We can also make the peer reviews publicly available. Why not? This type of transparency actually improves the quality. Nobody wants to be associated with a bad paper. They may do a better job in it. You can look up the people. You can see their entire publication history online. It just improves the rigor and the quality in the entire process. And I think, like one doesn't even need to debate it. One just needs to do it, and it's already been done, and more publishers should be doing it. 90,000 papers is not an insignificant amount of papers. Nobody's complaining about it. To the contrary.
I'll just add one thing about your reference to Yuko's, I thought, excellent point about knowledge. What has not yet been mentioned is the ecosystem here that includes not only funders, but that funders' responsibilities or expectations regarding open access, but the movement that has slowly, same kind of snail's pace, in requirements as a condition of grant award for dissemination plans, for knowledge translation plans. In fact, some of the major funding bodies that we're all familiar with now have senior level positions in their organization for vice president of knowledge translation and the like. I think we are all struggling with what those aspirational, I won't say slogan, but aspirational phrases actually mean. So while I share Robert Jan's, I would say, frustration, if I can read your body language, with the amount of time, on the other hand, science has the capacity to move very quickly when it wants to. You know, we sequenced the SARS coronavirus in about 6 weeks because it was a really good idea to do that, and nobody cared about, I'm not referring to you, I'm sort of the general comment, nobody cared about publication. There was a public health requirement. So it turns out that some of this is about political will, some of it is about what kind of economic drivers there are, and some of it is about the conservatism of many of the industries, and I include the academic industry in that. So it's not surprising in a way that this is going slowly, but I do think we've reached a tipping point, which is what I hope this panel is alerting you to. It's no longer, is this a good idea? Of course it's a good idea. How do we start to deal with the obvious impediments that are confronting us with this, this sort of valley of death? Okay, end of my editorial. Let's go to the microphone to my right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jürgen Knödelsitter. I'm doing astrophysics here in Toulouse for CNRS. And a lot of the interventions here are basically about how can we turn the current journals into gold open access journals. And I'm wondering, I mean, is this still basically the way how we will do science tomorrow? I mean, we have now continuous information flow. You get Twitter, Facebook, you name it. At least in my field, basically, how you exchange information is you put your paper on a preprint server, discuss it there, and you just send it to the journal to get on DOI and for your CV eventually. So will we, in 10, 20 years, still work in that way, how we work today? Isn't the opportunity now to talk about open science, to rethink globally how we will publish our results in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
So I'm going to put Koen on the spot because it's always best to ask about the future, to ask historians.
So my last sentence actually referred to that we are actually awaiting new disruptions. And I think in many ways the article is also from the past. But we are, in some ways, we are very conservative as scientists. And this is linked to the evaluation system. I mean, articles are so important. In a way, articles were meant to disseminate research in the 17th century when it was invented, not to evaluate researchers. But we have these kind of additional top-up things that we require from articles, and that makes it very difficult to move away from that format. And so we need to really rethink evaluation.
You will later on notice that Plan S, I don't refer at all in Plan S to gold or green or diamond. I mean, you're right, these will be very soon terms of the past, because we'll work in a completely different way. And very often, you know, we're not publishing an article, we are making available data sets via platform. That will be the future, most likely, and certainly in your area, scope 3 and other mechanisms. So, yes, you're right. We have a discussion actually about the past, and we are not yet having a discussion about the future or what will come in the future. So I fully agree with you.
We'll come to the microphone. I think we have time for maybe 2 questions, so please bear that in mind.
Stefan Berkmans from Elsevier. A very quick question, down to earth, practical. What do you think about capping the APCs? And if you do agree with it, how do you go about doing that?
It's something which, Stefan, I'm looking into, whether that would be a good idea. If we go quite quickly into a situation of full immediate open access, whereby grant holders can only publish in, say, accredited open access journals and platforms, then of course you need to avoid 2 things. First of all, that you have these predatory journals coming in, the low quality ones. And secondly, you have to avoid that there's going to be again a system whereby the APCs will go up to 6,000–7,000 euro. So one of the options may be that you have a cap for the first couple of years to stabilize the market, and only after that you get rid of the cap when the market has stabilized, so that we don't find ourselves into a system when it's more APC based of outrageous prices. I have been very much always been in favor of an APC which is fair enough to also allow your company and Springer and Wiley to flip a lot of journals. Because as I mentioned to you at many occasions, to Elsevier and to Springer and to Wiley and to Oxford University, I want you to be part of this change, and I realize very well that there's a cost element related to it. And therefore I think that the APC should be at such a level which allows you also to join the movement and to join the open access transition.
Thank you. Quick one, yes.
Just one thing on that. I'm not in favor of caps because I do believe that it does prevent what Robert Jan just said, like the large subscription publishers to flipping efficiently. But I understand that everybody is afraid that if the mandate is to go open access, then prices may rise. I think one good way of how to prevent this is to create a very transparent marketplace. And that means that there are no more non-disclosure agreements in the market. That all agreements between funders and publishers, or universities and publishers, need to be completely open and transparent. That self-regulates prices. In our 2 national agreements that we signed with Austria and with Sweden, you can download these agreements, everybody can read them, and every new agreement that we sign is being discussed with the new signees. So they know exactly what we have done before, what the prices are, what's transparent, that keeps a natural cap on us. We can't now say, oh, we want now twice as much money or whatever. It keeps basically the checks and the balances on every player involved. So rather than caps, I would say completely transparent agreements between taxpayer-funded publishing and the publishers.
I'm going to let this be our last question. I apologize. We're at our time. So if you could ask your question briefly. And I do want to let you know that immediately after this panel, the flash presentations are going to be presented. So I hope you would just stay shortly after the panel. You'll see the 2 presenters there. So please, your last question. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anna Slavec. I'm a researcher and consulting statistician at INRENEW Center of Excellence in Izola, Slovenia. A big part of my work is data management and supporting other researchers in preparing the dataset and preparing them for open data. And the question I get, an issue I came across a lot. Also previously I worked at the data science, the data archive. So researchers who collaborate with industry and they do their work with industry, they have this issue of they're not allowed to open their data. So my question is how to make open science also for applicative research done in collaboration with industry.
We had on the Horizon 2020 a big discussion about this issue with regard to open access to data. And I was very much insisting on an opt-out. that there's no obligation to really, share your data, not talking about data, because a lot of the participants in Horizon 2020 are industries, are small and medium-sized enterprises, often in consortia with universities. And I think it would have been wrong if you would have forced these organizations to release all their data. Strangely enough, if you ask me how many requests for opt-outs were received, not that many. And we see a lot of companies, even the pharmaceutical companies, increasingly making sets of data available. So it's again, as also Koen was saying, Kamila, it's a kind of, and Yuko, it's a cultural change which we need. When I talk about the cultural change, you probably heard about the European Open Science Cloud initiative, whereby the first component is to create a culture of data stewardship in the science community. That each scientist should indeed, if he or she gets a grant, have a data management plan. And that the data management plan has to respect the FAIR principles. And that indeed the data are not stored on local systems, but on certified repositories. And as a matter of fact, if you in future would ask for a grant or a funder, the funder should, in my opinion, already ask you, what is the repository where you want to store your data? Because at the moment, 60% of the medical experiments cannot be reproduced because the underlying data are not there anymore. They were on local systems and they are gone. So it's, again, a cultural change, as we have been saying here, in the science community of data stewardship, data management plans, respecting the FAIR principles, getting rid of local systems for storing the data, and do it in certified repositories so that we really can harvest on our investment.
Just a few words. There's some misunderstanding when we're promoting open science. It seems to be we have to open everything. It is not the case. We are not obliging people to open everything. By default, we are thinking it's better to have open data, open access. But you have that choice in case of business opportunity or security issues. But you have to demonstrate why you are opting out. That is.
It's a perfect way to finish. Thank you for your question. I want to thank all of you for your attention and participation here with the questions. And on your behalf, I'd like to have me join thanking our panel. Thank you very much. I'm only standing to say what I said before in a moment. In just a moment, we're going to be having the next presentation. It'll be brief, so I hope not too many of you leave, because there'll be young students presenting in a moment. It's on the long arm of chromosome 12.
Well done.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, that was well done. I liked your presentation. I mean, you had that was as advertised.
Yes, 19 slides.
Well, not even the slides. I mean, just the whole setup is exactly right. And I like the way that the highlighted. Where do we go?
Don't come.
Oh, I called them. Oh, right. So, Laurent and Ellen Marie, viens ici. I think you have here. Is this it? Is this your slide?
Yes.
You can use this. So let me just back up to this slide. It's not backing up. I will let you begin. Ladies and gentlemen, our first flash presentation. It will last for 3 minutes. Please.
Thank you. I'd like to present a work on the geography of scientific activity, which has experienced big changes during recent decades, becoming more evenly spread than ever before. Here on this slide, you can see the 8,000 places from which a scientific publication has been signed between 2000 and 2013, as measured in the Web of Science bibliographic database. Our poster shows that among these 8,000 places, most of the production used to come from Western cities. But between 2000 and 2013, new countries have entered the game, particularly China and Taiwan. Moreover, among the traditionally dominant scientific countries, the distribution of the production has tended to become more evenly spread between metropolitan areas and secondary cities. That's the upper part of the poster. The poster is not shown here, but you can grab it on our website, which is on the slide. Our poster also shows that collaborations, as measured by the number of co-publications, have developed between these 8,000 places. These collaborations have increased faster between cities in the same country. International as well as intercontinental collaborations have also increased, but at a slower pace. The reason for this is that national systems are still very important to explain the distribution of scientific collaboration. Notably, the growth of Chinese production has resulted in an ongoing integration of new Chinese cities in the network of the most intense scientific collaboration of the world. To finish, our poster shows that the spatial deconcentration of scientific production and scientific collaboration has been followed by a spatial deconcentration of scientific visibility. Not only are emerging countries and secondary cities producing and collaborating more than before, but they are also receiving a higher share of the world's citations. The geography of scientific activities is therefore becoming more evenly distributed than it used to be. The result presented in this poster came from the research program called Net Science from the SMS LabX, based in Toulouse since 2013 on the geography of science. Marion Maisonneuve and I would like to thank the ESOF committee for selecting it. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Le deuxième.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am Ellen Marie Forsberg from Oslo Metropolitan University. The European Printtiger project has conducted comprehensive studies in research integrity and misconduct. And this research shows that there is a need for increased focus on and guidance on how organizations may address these issues. So in order to develop this kind of guidance that is anchored beyond the Printtiger consortium, a consensus panel was established with a broader range of members representing wide practical and theoretical understanding on how to strengthen integrity in research organizations. And you can see the panel members to the right there. They consist of members from different European countries and organizations with diversity in terms of gender, geography, function, seniority, and disciplinary background. This panel discussed over the winter in 2 rounds by email in a Delphi process, and we finalized the recommendations in a 1-day consensus conference in Bonn on the 7th of February this year. So the poster that is on place 70 presents the outcomes of the consensus conference. And it's published on, online on the Printtiger website and also open access in Science and Engineering Ethics. The guidelines presented here target mostly the leaders. And we try to balance the need for being general and to give specific guidance. So I will go quickly, just read basically the guidelines because there is no time, but please come and talk with me afterwards or check out the more substantial descriptions in the statement. So the consensus panel wanted to emphasize the following issues that are important for organizations and leaders that want to strengthen research integrity. Firstly, to provide information about research integrity, to provide also education, training, and mentoring, and not least, strengthening a research integrity culture. We believe that it is important to facilitate open dialogue and not least have wise incentive management, which has been discussed a lot in this conference. We recommend implementing quality assurance procedures, improving the work environment and work satisfaction, which is shown to be correlated with good research integrity, increasing transparency of misconduct cases, opening up research, which fits nicely in this session, implementing safe and effective whistleblowing channels, and protecting the alleged perpetrators, establishing a research integrity committee, and appointing also an ombudsperson, which is a less formal procedure. And finally, making explicit the applicable standards for research integrity. And I think that's what I have time for. Thank you very much.
And I believe that concludes this portion. Thank you all for your attendance.
Moi je l'aurais dit dans les 250, mais après tu aimes bien. Le micro tu veux dire? Alors, tu veux que le pupitre? Vraiment, mon gars. Là, je tape vraiment. Là. C'est celui qui est le mieux fixé, pourtant.